Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is.
Our reading this morning, we're going to be reading from the book of Psalms, chapter 139, verses 1 through 6, and then 13 through 18. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bible, it's going to be page 618. O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. You hem me in behind and before. You have laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of earth, your eye saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book, before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. And our New Testament reading from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 5 through 12. That'll be on page 1144. For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that all this surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body. So then, death is at work in us, but life is at work in you.
Good morning. As I prepare for my sermon, I checked the weather today, and it was 100% rainy. And what kind of 100% is this? But even though it's not rain, it does not rain, but this is a good weather to bring ourselves to God because it's cooler than other days, and the weather helps us hear God's whispering voice in our ears that how much God loves us. Now all rise and share the love of God with one another. In the time of Jesus and after his resurrection and in the time of early church, the fellowship was almost everything according to Acts chapter 2. They share everything with one another, and they greet one another, and they sold their possessions to share with one another too. So maybe we can spend more time in sharing and fellowship, and maybe shorten my sermon time accordingly. That makes perfect service. Okay. There is a boy who is always teased by other neighborhood boys for being stupid. Their favorite joke is to offer this boy his choice between a nickel and a dime. He always takes the nickel. One day, after he takes the nickel, a neighbor takes him aside and says, Michael, those boys are making fun of you. Don't you know that a dime is worth more than a nickel, even though the nickel is bigger? Then the boy grins and says, well, if I took the dime, they would stop doing it. So far, I've made $20. This is a joke. What is inside of this boy is much stronger than what he faces outside of himself. If we truly have strong centeredness inside, we may not be as much affected by what happens outside of us. We can even boldly embrace sufferings without destroying our inner peace. As Mahatma Gandhi said, nobody can hurt me without my permission. Nobody can hurt me without my own permission. If that is true to Mahatma Gandhi, then how much it is true to Jesus Christ and all believers. I guess you may still remember the sermon I preached last week. I said that Apostle Paul admonished the believers in Rome not to behave as if they are debtors to the sinful world. It is like somebody saying, I feel more comfortable in prison than outside the world. I feel like I belong here. They are slaves to sin, but behave like they are debtors to it. However, in fact, this is a true confession of Albert Bell, who spent 2 decades behind the bar from the age of 12. He said, my first time incarcerated at the age of 12 was frightening. But I had to put on a front, and that persona started growing in me. I started accepting the life. He confessed that by the 3rd and 4th time he was incarcerated, it became comfortable. He was more comfortable incarcerated than outside the world, which he found more frightening than anything else. Just like this man, human beings with the original sin feels more comfortable with the sinful world than standing against it. One of the most common symptoms of humans in this stage is that they pursue ostensible decorations of life to make themselves look the busiest, smartest, coolest, and most important people in the world. Bigger houses, bigger cars, and more luxurious lifestyle are among the high priorities than anything else in their lives. Relentless postings in social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to draw people's attention. All of these efforts intend to decorate their life to look more competitive and romantic in the eyes of the people around them. But on the contrary, one shocking image to describe a Christian identity in today's passage is clay pots. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7, we have this treasure in clay pots, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. Paul says we are like clay pots. Clay pots or earthen vessels are common and cheap. Once like these red flower pots we can easily buy from Home Depot. They're also fragile and easily broken. Nobody thinks clay pots are valuable. And if someone does, this is not because of the pot itself, but because of what is inside of it. As a Christian, I often find many of us having more interest in decorating ourselves than making Jesus visible through us. One of the obvious cases is that we pick and choose the images of Jesus in the Bible according to our preference, even though there are different images of Jesus in the Bible. We are often stuck between the image we want to see and the image we don't like about Jesus. It seems we are decorating the image of Jesus as if Jesus is the clay pot, and we are the valuable thing inside of it. Usually there is no conflict between two images when we read good words like love, kindness, gentleness, patience, trust, hope. They are all godly character qualities. Everybody loves Jesus with these traits, and we have no problem to follow this Jesus. But there are character qualities in the Bible to which we give less attention. For example, Jesus calls us the salt and light of the world. Jesus did not say we need to become salt and light in the world, as if our faith in Jesus is one thing, or the first step, and our role as salt and light of the world is another or next step. If we lose our role as salt and light, we are not his disciples, being thrown out and trampled by people in the street. So in this case, a sense of righteousness, love for peace, enthusiasm, compassion, these are character qualities Jesus required of us as his disciples. And Jesus himself manifested as the light of the world that cast out the darkness of the world. How can we possess both traits, not either one or the other? Today's passage gives us an answer. It is to recognize ourselves as clay pots, not to decorate itself. A suggested solution in today's passage is to keep the clay pot vulnerable in itself, so that the focus may be quickly moved to what is inside of it. After all, the value of the clay pot is nothing by itself, but everything to do with what is inside of it. And Paul explains what he has in his clay pot in verse 6. The light of the knowledge of the glory of God, which was perfectly manifested in the face of Jesus Christ. This is the treasure. This is the treasure he had in his clay pot. We are clay pots, holding this glory in ourselves. We may have some cracks and here and there, but nothing on earth can take this treasure away from us. The light of the knowledge of the glory of God. The glorious God sacrificing for human sins. That glory, sacrificial glory, but victorious glory, is in ourselves. Once we have seen the light of God's glory in Jesus Christ, we can understand the beauty of the kingdom of God. Because of Jesus Christ in our clay pots, all those character qualities of heaven, like love and righteousness, gentleness and justice, joys and mourning, peace and resistance, that seemingly impossible to coexist can work together in ourselves. When we have a real thing in ourselves, we are not shaken by others' reputations too much, whether they are good or bad. We have joy and peace not because of a lot of good things happening in our lives, but because we hear all the compliments from the people in the world. But because we have this treasure in our hearts, the abundance of God's love in our lives. People's reputation is nothing compared to what we have inside of us as our treasures. As you may know, I used to work at a beauty supply in Nashville, doing my part-time ministry in the church. But during the weekdays, I worked 40 hours in the beauty supply. In the store, I saw people buying fake jewelries, like silver-plated rings and necklaces. They looked like real, but the rings were only $4.99, and necklaces were $11.99. Many of the customers did not buy the fake rings or necklaces because they were poor. They appeared in the store fully dressed, nice dress, and bought them on the way to their parties because they did not have to worry about losing or wrecking the real ones. There was no moment of awkwardness or embarrassment when they paid for the fake jewelry because they had real ones at home. The real peace and joy is not related to how well we decorate the clay pots, but to our understanding of what treasures we have in ourselves. We don't seek our pride from the clay pot, but from what we have inside of us. In today's passage, in verse 11, we read, "For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh." How can we seek our pride from ourselves when God knows everything about us? How pathetic that we make our pride in front of God. Like Psalm 139 says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely." Folks, even if we decorate the clay pots, they are just clay pots. However, people spend too much time and energy to decorate the clay pots, sharing the pictures of their best moments on social media relentlessly. I love to see the pictures of families, kids, and their wonderful time with friends, but I'm quite uncomfortable when people post their cars, expensive houses, handbags, or other stuffs, because I know what desire they have in mind, to brag about what they have, hoping to be seen more than who they are. The more people find their emptiness inside, the more they elaborate decorating outside. During the last week, I was frustrated with the news about a televangelist in Louisiana who said that God told him that he needed a new jet on the top of his existing 3 jets. He urged his flock, online and offline, to donate funds so that his ministry can purchase a brand new private jet, which cost $54 million. The conversation that he insisted to happen between himself and God looks quite funny to me. According to him, God appeared to him and asked like this, Jesse, you want to come up where I am at? I want you to believe in me for a Falcon 7X, a newer model of jet. He said that the first thing he thought in his mind was, well, how am I going to pay for it? Then he recalled what God said to him a long time ago. Jesse, I didn't ask you to pay for it. I asked you to believe for it. And the did not forget to mention 2 other pastors who bought $60 million jets individually. I don't understand why he needed 4 private jets for his ministry. I don't understand why he needed to spend $54 million for another one. I don't understand what kind of God he believes and what kind of God he preaches about. I don't understand how his another $54 million investment in a new private jet can help spread the gospel of Jesus, who rode a donkey and who were called a friend of sinners and the friend of abandoned people in the society. To me, it is nothing but decorating the clay pot. It has nothing to do with treasuring Jesus Christ and making the life of Jesus Christ visible in our bodies. Do you still remember the story of the man in the introduction? The story of man I introduced in the beginning of my sermon was a real story. He has been in and out of prison a few times, spending 20 years of his life in prison. As I said in the beginning, he was horrified at some point to find himself feeling more comfortable in prison than outside the world. However, thanks to the program called Ready, Willing, Able, he enrolled in the program for a year to learn different job skills. Statistically, 2/3 of people released from prison in the U.S. are rearrested within 3 years. More than 60% of the prisoners who were released are rearrested in 3 years. But among the graduates of this program, there are 60% less likely to be convicted of a felony 3 years after their graduation. This program has been supported by the Doe Fund, established by George MacDonald in New York City in 1985. Since 1990, more than 22,000 people have graduated from this program. Do you know what the entire size of the fund is now? In the time of the establishment, it was much smaller, but now it grows up to $60 million fund, which is the same amount to the prices of private jets of some televangelists. Think about 22,000 people who have been incarcerated for too long, but now have hope for their new life. And compare the same money used for the private jet. What kind of Jesus do we proclaim? What kind of love of God do we spread in the world? brothers and sisters in Christ. We may still have many unanswered questions, many perplexing circumstances in life. But these ambiguous questions in life are not answered through reasoning or discussions. Most exhausting questions in life find the answers from the relationships with God and with others. How many of you remember the questions you asked your own parents in your childhood? How many answers from them are still memorable? A study shows that small kids ask 73 questions a day and 413 questions every week on average. And for half of the questions, parents struggle to answer. However, as long as they are in love relationship with their parents, whether they get all the answers correctly does not matter too much. Paul says Christians face sufferings and even adversity that takes us beyond our own capacities. We may be perplexed with the questions and accusations raised by the people in the world. However, we should never try to appeal ourselves by decorating clay pots. Instead, we need to trust and trust the sustaining grace and power of God working in ourselves. After all, our faith is not all about me, but all about Jesus Christ. God does not use us because we are strong and we are perfect. God chose to use us because we are clay pots, so that God's power and glory may be displayed even more clearly through our weaknesses and brokenness. And may God be glorified through the most vulnerable clay pots like us. Amen.